everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. Out of deep respect for Indigenous peoples in Canada, we acknowledge that the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation is situated upon traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat peoples. We also acknowledge that the land covered by Treaty 13 is held by the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize the contributions and enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples in Ontario and the rest of Canada. We are grateful to work on this land. And I am Fabiana Bacchini, the Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, CPBF. We are a charitable organization, and our mission is to empower families of premature babies through support and education. This Preemie Chats series is one of the many initiatives we have to bring information for NICU families and healthcare professionals. Here every Friday, we talk with experts, researchers, and parents who share with us their experience and knowledge. Also on our website, canadianpreemies.org, parents will find all kinds of resources and support. One of them is the Parent Care Program. We are offering 4 free therapy sessions for families currently in the NICU and those who have been discharged up to 3 years. And all the information about the Parent Care Program is also on our website. And today's presentation is in collaboration with the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses and Hamilton Regional Indian Center. In honor of Canada's National Indigenous Peoples Day was this week, June 21st. We'll talk about caring for Indigenous mothers in the NICU, promoting culturally safe care. And this presentation, I have here Dr. Preemie Wright and Rachel VanEvery, who will be discussing the Healing the Hurt video campaign, which aims to share the experiences of Indigenous mothers using healthcare for their infants with the intention of promoting culturally safe care. The project was created at the direction of Indigenous mothers, Indigenous service providers, and community members in Hamilton, Ontario, and funded by the Canadian Institute of Health Research, the CIHR. The study finds, as they relate specifically to Indigenous mothers whose infants received care in the NICU, will be shared to encourage health providers to provide culturally safe care for Indigenous families in the NICU context. And I have here joining us live from Hamilton, Dr. Preemie Wright, who is the past president and current president-elect of the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses. She's also a neonatal nurse practitioner at McMaster University Children's Hospital and an assistant professor at the Lawrence S. Bloomberg Faculty of Nursing at the University of Toronto. She has worked with the Indigenous community in Hamilton since 2013, assisting Indigenous-led organizations in meeting their research goals as they relate to healthy parenting and early childhood development. Dr. Preemie Wright, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having us.
And I also have Rachel VanEvery, who is a PhD candidate in the Department of Health, Aging, and Society at McMaster University. Rachel lives in the beautiful land of the Six Nations of the Grand River Territory with her husband and 3 children. So thank you both of you for being here today. Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today to really teach us what we need to know to welcome all families, Indigenous families, into the NICU.
Thank you for having me.
So we do have a presentation, and if you have any questions, we do want you to ask questions, and we want to hear your insights or experience. Please add all to the comments, and we will address at the end of their presentation. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Rachel and I have known each other for a long time, almost a decade now, and been working together since on research with Indigenous families in the Hamilton area and with the Hamilton Regional Indian Center and other Indigenous-led community partners, helping to advance their programming to meet the needs of their families. And we're very happy to be here. Thanks so much for having us. We wanted to acknowledge National Indigenous Peoples Day this week, which fell on June 21st. This week is a reminder of the responsibilities we all have to learn about our colonial history and its previous and continued impact on the lives of Indigenous peoples. Rachel and I are privileged to live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and on the lands protected with the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. The picture here depicts a two-row wampum belt agreement, which was made between the Dutch settlers and the Haudenosaunee people of the region to live together in harmony. There are many stories of its meaning, but in one, the purple lines are said to represent the ways of the Haudenosaunee and of the European settlers. In one row is a ship with the settlers' ways, and in the other a canoe with the Haudenosaunee ways. And it is said that each will travel down the river of life side by side. Neither will attempt to steer the other's vessel. There were 3 principles agreed upon to make this treaty last, including friendship, peace, and that the agreement would last forever. Today, this treaty is applicable to all settlers and our relationships with Indigenous peoples. As we will share next, the Healing the Hurt campaign is one way that we show our commitment to this treaty, through treating one another with kindness and respect, promoting friendship and peaceful relationships.
Yeah, so the Healing and the Hurt campaign originated from Indigenous moms who participated in a study with Dr. Wright about their experience using healthcare services for their infants. We are very thankful for the moms who shared their stories and continue to work with us to make a real impact with health professionals. One of the mothers suggested documenting their experiences in a video, and the idea took off. We managed to secure funding from the Canadian Institute of Health Research and created an advisory group. The group met regularly over the period of approximately 1 year before the videos were finalized. And the group included mothers, including those you see in the video that we'll show you next and our social media posts, as well as First Nations early childhood service providers, nurses, and 2 nurse practitioners, as well as an Indigenous knowledge holder. Together, at the direction of the mothers, the advisory group created this project to reach health providers and students across the country. And our goal is to promote culturally safe healthcare practices for Indigenous families. You can also view the videos on our website at indigenousmomandbaby.org and view additional videos and content on our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. So next, we're going to play the trailer. The content may be upsetting. It may be difficult to fully understand the injustices faced by these mothers. It's important, however, to hear their stories and acknowledge their experiences and pain so that we can also recognize what we can do to better provide culturally safe care for Indigenous families.
Second, begged my husband to not go to work because I knew today was the day she was going to be born. I didn't know that January 2nd would be the day that she died. And I stripped my daughter naked. The doctor looked up and she said to me, "I'm looking for bite marks, burns, and bruising." I didn't understand why. There was no signs of neglect or abuse. I was the one who wanted to be referred. I didn't even go back for 2 months because I was so scared to see her and talk to her because I feel like she was going to make me feel bad. It makes you wish that you weren't Native. It makes you wish that you were any other race but that. I wasn't married at the time. I lived in Native housing. I was on welfare. I was a statistic. I wasn't a human being. The way we're treated, it affects us. You have the power to save people's lives. And I don't think a lot of them realize that.
I'm sorry, I was muted. We can't get through a presentation without a technical glitch like that. I'm sorry. The mothers involved in the original research project spoke to their experiences engaging with healthcare, which included experiences with family doctors, emergency rooms, specialized care, and others. Today, we're going to focus on the mothers' experiences in the NICU. There were 3 important messages these mothers had for health providers to improve their experiences in the NICU. These included building relationships, providing holistic care, and taking a sensitive approach to child protection. And we'll go through each separately. So when we talk about building relationships, we'll discuss 5 strategies for the NICU context. The first is effective communication skills. Taking and being intentional and using active listening skills, updating parents on plans of care, interacting with their children are really important to help building relationships with Indigenous mothers and families. And nurses' use of effective communication skills has been shown to increase parents' confidence in our, as nurses, knowledge base and skills. And this reduces parental stress, anxiety, and depression. The second key piece of building relationships was providing non-judgmental care. There has been a history of residential schools and historical trauma that Indigenous peoples have faced. And with that, they also commonly can also experience social inequities, things like poverty. Indigenous mothers are sometimes young mothers, and many of the mothers in this study were young, and they shared their feelings about being judged as young mothers and their fear of child apprehension because of how extremely high child apprehension is in Canada. And so it was super important that the care they received was non-judgmental to help them build relationships with their health providers. The third was to enable trust. This requires building rapport, and it might take some time to develop with families. And so really helping to keep the similar staffing in the NICU, things like primary nursing care, can really help enable relationships and trust between families and their caregivers in the NICU. The fourth was collaborative decision-making. This is a component of FICARE, which you're probably familiar with, or family-centered care, and it's really important to make decisions with families, supporting mothers in their decisions to breastfeed or to provide breast milk, individualizing your approach to care, not assuming that mothers who have other children are confident in their care of their children, and really helping to address what their needs are, and asking them individually, what are your needs and how can we address these? Providing a consistent care, again, like we've spoken to about enabling trust, but having the same provider consistently helps to build trust and relationships. And these take time to build, especially with Indigenous families who have good reason to not trust health providers. So we need to make sure that we are prioritizing keeping the same staff as possible with these families. When families trust us, and we have a relationship with them, they are more comfortable being honest about their needs. And when they're honest about their needs, we are able to better care for them as health providers. Aim to meet the individual needs of the families you care for, and involve social work services if you can to assist with certain insecurities like housing, food insecurity, and other financial problems that they may be dealing with. Indigenous families can also be linked with Indigenous specific programs in the area that you work. So find out what these supports are in your area and be intentional in helping linking families to them. Care that embodies these components has actually been associated with improved breastfeeding or express breast milk feeding, decreased stress, anxiety, and depression, and improving confidence in parenting.
Okay, so to many Indigenous people, health and well-being can be symbolized by the medicine wheel, which encompasses physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. So in the study with Dr. Wright, mothers were asked to reflect on the holistic needs of their infant. And they all agreed that health providers met their infant's physical health needs, which to them meant treating illness, supporting feeding, and promoting breastfeeding. Emotional needs of their infants included comforting their infant, fostering feelings of safety, and providing love and attention. One mother shared her experience of waiting 3 days before she was offered the opportunity to hold her infant. And as a result, she did not feel the health providers had met her infant's emotional needs because they had denied him the comfort of his mother. The infant's mental or developmental needs included their cognitive and motor skill progression. Mothers shared that these needs were met after their NICU experience and not during. This likely reflects a lack of communication on the part of health providers in sharing how they are meeting these needs of infants. And as health professionals, we also need to recognize these developmental needs of infants in settings such as the NICU as important and sharing these information with parents. Finally, the spiritual needs of infants were supported by being thankful for the infants as they are a gift, as well as participating in traditional practices like smudging or returning the umbilical cord or placenta to Mother Earth, the use of cedar baths, and celebrating the infant's beginning of life and development of their identity. These needs were not seen as being met in the NICU context, and in some cases, they were prohibited. One mother also shared how breastfeeding supported her infant's spiritual health, as she believed this bonded their spirit when breastfeeding. So some strategies for providing holistic care and meeting the needs of Indigenous families may include things like smudging protocols, so families can engage in cleansing and revitalizing when smudging while in hospital. Access to safe spaces where families can gather, engage in traditions and their culture, as well as smudging, as well as access to Indigenous elders and knowledge holders, access to natural medicines and ceremonies, and promoting that connection with Indigenous supports that are available, like Indigenous navigators or advocates, friendship centers, and Indigenous health centers. I also wanted to point out some of the items on the screen and highlight their meaning with the intention of showing how they could be utilized within the NICU context. These are items that I've gathered and are in various places within my home, and I believe they provide skill and sensory development for my own children. As you can visually see all these items, you can touch and craft each item. When you grow the corn, beans, and squash seeds, you get to then taste them. When playing the hand or the water drum and rattles, you can hear them. And when you smudge, you can smell cedar, sage, or sweetgrass. So when you are providing safe spaces within hospital settings, Indigenous families are then given the opportunity to engage with their culture at a time that may be difficult or uncomfortable. So me and my husband, we also do a lot of different crafts and trying to make different things out of materials that we can find with our children. And together we've learned to make things like medicine pouches, birch bark canoes, moccasins, and soap carvings. There's a lot of teachings that can be shared when making crafts or simply when holding or welcoming these items in spaces. For example, I have leather in the picture, and when you hold leather, you can also share a teaching, for example, of the deer or the process of making leather. And leather also serves as a reminder of our connection to nature. Other suggestions is for if families are going to the hospital with their family unit, it may be helpful to have things like games or materials for the children to make crafts. For example, I have ring and ping in the picture. So I also think it is really important to provide safe spaces for families, whether it is to just dance or play with drums and rattles. Some families may want their infants to wear moccasins, so making them available the same way hats are available when newborns are born. My son is really interested in the different fox animals, so we have a foxtail you can see underneath the drum in our medicine box, as well as seeds, because they're medicine and our sustenance. And I also have some sweetgrass, so families can also practice things like braiding or making different objects out of sweetgrass.
Thanks, Rachel. For some mothers, their involvement with child protection services has continued to haunt them through subsequent pregnancies and led to racist and discriminatory care. The Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls report has since been published and described the process known as birth alerts or flagging. They've deemed this dangerous as it's led to mothers not seeking care during their pregnancy or during birth because of trying to avoid discriminatory care or because of fear that their children would be apprehended. So at the recommendation of this report, this practice has since been eliminated in Ontario, but this only happened in the last 2 years. Given the history of residential schools and the 60s scoop where children were forcibly removed from their homes, many to be adopted into families across the globe before their parents could locate them, it is no wonder that Indigenous mothers are extremely fearful when child services become involved. When clinicians involve child services in insensitive ways, mothers feel threatened and judged, and they're less likely to interact with health providers in the future. Taking a trauma-informed approach to involving child services is extremely important. Health providers must first have an understanding of the historical trauma endured by Indigenous families, and next they must recognize the role of social and contextual factors that impact families, and first work to meet these inequities rather than punishing families for them. Social workers should be involved to support families. Health providers should be aware of local resources that are available for families and link families to them. Private areas should be chosen for sensitive conversations, and conversations should be supportive and build on a family's strengths. A non-judgmental approach is key. And when child protection services must be involved with an Indigenous family, an Indigenous advocate is required to be present to support the family. Many mothers shared how involving child protection services was actually used as a threat for avoiding missed appointments. And I'm sure you probably can think of examples you've seen in your NICU. And this is completely inappropriate. Taking a trauma-informed approach to care for Indigenous families means recognizing the harm that can cause for families, and that it will actually lead to avoidance of the healthcare system rather than engagement. So in summary, the Healing the Hurt campaign was created with Indigenous mothers who want to share their stories with clinicians to stimulate transformative change in attitudes, beliefs, and care delivery. Many healthcare and educational institutions are seeking ways to educate staff and students on Indigenous health and cultural safety. Healing the Hurt is an educational resource that can be used as part of a comprehensive curriculum on Indigenous health equity and cultural safety. Our website also provides more details about the study findings, as well as links to resources that can support further self-study about the history of Indigenous peoples in Canada, culturally safe healthcare, and health equity. Our social media sites post weekly content to help you continue learning more about how healthcare impacts families. We invite you to visit our website and follow our social media sites to learn more. Thanks so much for having us today. You're muted, Fabiana.
You know, 180 videos later, and we still do that.
I know.
Wow, thank you so much for the presentation. And if you haven't seen the full video is on the website. We only play the trailer. And it's such a strong message on the video. I think my first question is, how was, when you launched the video, what was the reaction of the community?
Rachel, feel free to jump in. I think anyone who I've heard that has watched the video finds it difficult to watch. I still find it difficult to watch, and I've watched it many, many times. It's really hard to, as nurses in particular, to see our clients and the suffering that they have to endure and the injustices that they experience at the hand of healthcare providers. I think, unfortunately, because of COVID, there's been lots of issues with COVID, but with healthcare providers, they've been really, they've been forced to the front line. They've been worked to the bone with COVID and a lack of resources, and just overwhelmed with the healthcare system in general. And so this project hasn't been taken up as well as we'd have liked it to be, because it was launched sort of right at the beginning of COVID. So we're really hoping now that things are settling down, that there's a bit more capacity amongst health organizations and universities that are providing education for different health provider programs to incorporate this into their curriculum on and their training for staff on cultural safety.
Wow, this is so important. Rachel, did you hear from many other families that there was relatable content?
Yeah, I definitely think it's relatable, both personally and within the broader population of Indigenous people. And I think there's also many positive experiences that we're looking forward to sharing from the mothers who did participate in the research as well. So we're looking for more of those opportunities, and we're just glad that we have this chance now to share with the project and where it's headed.
Absolutely. My question to you is, because this research and the video was based in one area of Ontario, is this a problem across the country? Because there's so many provinces and some hospitals closer to more Indigenous communities, but always just across the board, every province, what you hear. What is the situation out there?
It is definitely, I would say, a global problem for Indigenous people in, all colonized countries are similar. Actually, I was privileged to go to a conference in New Zealand where a researcher presented on the local Indigenous people, the Maori there, and their experiences in the NICU, and her results with the experiences that those families shared was that it was extremely similar to the experiences of families in Canada and in our study. So it's certainly everywhere. I think some centers do a better job than others, but I think everyone has room to improve, that's for sure.
Wow, absolutely. And so we have a few comments that I will leave for you to read. Because I think it is I think a lot of work that every hospital has to do. So a question in regards to, you talk a lot about space and bringing instruments and the moccasin into the hospital. So are hospitals aware of that now? Like, do they have those spaces for Indigenous families? I heard some hospitals now have a place to do the smudging ceremony. How is that across all the NICUs? Because you have level 3 NICUs. We know the hospitals have a little bit more room to accommodate. Some level 2s have no room. So how can we create safe space in units or hospitals where they don't have so much of the physical capacity?
Yeah, there's certainly an initiative that has really sparked interest in creating policy or room for smudging in hospitals. It really is about knowing sort of what the local capacity is, letting the right people know that you're going to be doing it. It's often is not something that sets off smoke alarms and things like that, but people are really apprehensive to allow it. So I would invite all health providers to seek out what their current policies are at their institution, because it likely exists, so that they're aware of it and they can offer it to families and be able to provide it when asked. But also, if they don't have that policy, then to really try to work with local Indigenous leaders to create that kind of safe space for families, because it's certainly very meaningful, and Rachel can speak more to that.
Yeah, and I think most of my experience has been involved with McMaster's Children's Hospital, who I think has done a really great job in taking up these initiatives. For example, they do have a space designated for Indigenous families. It stores cultural tools and is just an area where Indigenous people can gather together to connect and get the support from their families, and also engage with elders or knowledge holders or people within the local Indigenous community to be supported within the hospital.
Right. So before we went live, we were quick chatting about how to identify, if the family comes and identify themselves as Indigenous, of the staff is going to ask the family their faith or cultural, so they can accommodate different ceremonies or bring some extra support for the families. So how is it happening in Canada right now? Because you talk about this one mom on the video that it really makes me cry. She said sometimes she wished she was from another cultural background, which is a terrible thing to think about. This is happening in Canada, where country that welcomes so many of us immigrants, and this is how we treat our own people here. So how, if I'm going to be in labor, I'm coming to a hospital, do I identify myself so I can make sure my placenta, my umbilical cord, everything is the way I want it to be, to respect my culture and my traditions?
So I can speak to Ontario. Generally across Canada, there isn't a set way of asking people to identify their cultural background or their religious background in any kind of intake. In some places in the country there are, but I would say those are still the minority. Instead, I would put the onus on the health provider. I think there's room for organizations to figure out how to do that safely, but an individual needs to feel safe to disclose their identity to their health provider, because right now, people may not feel that safety, and they may think that if they disclose that they're Indigenous, that they'll actually receive racist and discriminatory care, and so they'd rather not let you know that. So first, you really need to, we need to be setting up for success and building relationships and making sure our spaces are welcoming and inclusive, and then taking the through that relationship with families, then asking, what do you need to feel safe, or what do you need to have, a positive healthcare experience here? What can we do for you? And that then, can open up the conversation where people feel comfortable disclosing their needs. And sometimes that can be very general, I think, in just providing what some of the opportunities are in the hospital. We have spaces, if you want a chaplain, we have spaces where you could smudge, we have spaces for Indigenous elders, like including those things, not making assumptions, but letting people know that, there are available opportunities in your organization, to make people feel safe and included.
Yeah, so I think my question to you is, I've been in Canada for 20 years, and I only learned about residential schools pretty much 6 years ago when my son came home, talk about residential school. So what is that? I've never heard of that, 20 years in Canada. We end up going to a tour of Rachel's community, the beautiful Six Nations of the First River, where we learn in depth what happened. And you become more understanding and compassionate, and you really is a lot of thinking that you have to do to understand the issues. Do you think because the residential schools came up so fierce in the last few years, people are more understanding and reevaluating their own perceptions of the Indigenous peoples in Canada, and maybe this stigma, it's going away? Obviously going to take years, but do you think this was some, I wouldn't say positive, but a light at the end of the tunnel that things can change culturally?
Rachel, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I think the release of the Truth and Reconciliation report and calls to action were definitely a start and a great opportunity to have those conversations. I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and just from my personal experiences of engaging within the healthcare system to meet my own infants healthcare needs, I have noticed an improvement in the way that healthcare providers communicate with me. They're more aware of situations that could have impacted me, but they're not also assuming that either. They're really trying to take an individualized approach, which I find very helpful. And they're trying to recognize my strengths so that I'm able to meet my children's needs and feel safe accessing those services.
Right. So, Rachel, my other question to you is, because I learned in one of the conferences the role of the grandmother when you have a baby as a mother. So what is the role of the grandmother? And then ICUs, especially the pandemic, we have this very narrow view of the family. We talk about the parents and the parents as the main caregivers, but we don't include the grandparents. And knowing the importance of the grandparents, so how the Indigenous families navigate that piece with the healthcare professionals, especially in the NICU, when the restrictions are still happening with COVID, to explain, the grandmother is a key person in the life of my child. And when I look at your medicine wheel, you talk about the mind, the spirit, the emotion, the body, the grandmother, it is in one of those quadrants that you show, isn't it?
Yeah, I think my grandmother especially is within all those quadrants. She helps me understand how to meet all those needs, whether it be physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, for both myself and for my children. So yeah, I definitely think grandmothers play a very important role in bringing newborns into life and helping them learn their identity.
So, Amy, with all your research, so where are we going now with this? Are we blasting this through all the hospitals into their trainings, so everybody has this information, so families can never feel again the way those two mothers in your trailer feel?
Yeah, I sure hope so. There's certainly an effort across the country to increase cultural safety training amongst health providers. It is one of the calls to actions in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission published in 2015, and it's mandated across the country. So there are efforts, and I know they were probably stalled and slowed because of COVID, but hopefully there's capacity to look at that and put more energy back into those efforts, because they are super important. This has lasting impacts, right? We don't make an impact in a single situation in the NICU. We impact that family's feelings towards healthcare going forward, and that has impacts on them. It has impacts on their children, and potentially generations. So it's extremely important that we really take this learning, that we learn more, and that we are really reflexive of our own selves and our stereotypes and our own beliefs and values, and really try to adjust our care to be more culturally safe.
Yes. Rachel, let's talk about when you had your babies. Did you experience any of that personally in the hospital?
No, I did not, very thankfully. And I think being able to identify as a nurse myself may have played a role in that. So I fortunately didn't have negative experiences. I feel like I was really listened to, and the healthcare providers were really open to understand what I wanted for my infants, whether I wanted to stay a few extra days in the hospital so that I could make sure I felt safe and comfortable to come home, or whether I wanted to come home the next day. I felt supported. So I'm very thankful for my opportunities, but I also recognize and acknowledge that not everybody gets that experience. So I just hope that I can share my story as well as others, and can create a better future for Indigenous mothers who do engage in the healthcare system.
Absolutely. So you mentioned going home, and we know that a lot of Indigenous families live very far from the hospital, especially the people who live in the northern Canada or rural and remote areas. They have to access the big centers, and they spend a lot of months away from their community. What kind of resources and how the healthcare providers can support families who are actually away from home? while they are in the NICU, because we know this happens a lot in a lot of places in Canada, or in the big centers especially.
Yeah, I think one important lesson that we learned is the importance of connecting, Indigenous people, whether they identify or not as First Nations, Inuit, or Métis, to the local Indigenous support organizations that are available if they're going to the city. So, for example, the Hamilton Regional Indian Center plays a big role. If they're leaving a reserve, you can connect them to a local reserve if that's the pathway they want to take to getting the support they need. I'm very fortunate in my community. We have our own birthing center. So I think that's very helpful to have, the midwives also being able to accompany those mothers who are going to the hospital to give birth to their children.
Absolutely. Amy, one last message before you wrap it up today.
Yeah, please visit the website and share it with your colleagues. And, be really intentional about just encouraging your your institutions to take the initiative to integrate cultural safety training, Indigenous history, Indigenous culture training into the staff in the hospitals and the universities.
Absolutely. Rachel, one last message from you.
I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to having more opportunities with the rest of, Canada to share the experiences of mothers and create a healthier and better future and pathway forward.
Absolutely. So thank you both so much for sharing this amazing work that you've done. I do hope every center have hands-on your work, especially the video that is so impactful. And I feel that we all have a role to play in advocating for this course of cultural safety to be placed in every hospital across Canada and for all the NICU staff. Let me just see if there is one more comment here coming from live. I think I saw one more. Oh, no, we just have amazing work, Rachel and Amy. Thanks for sharing. I cannot put on the screen right now, but there's a few comments back on the chat after. But thank you both so much for being here today. Rachel, thank you for all the work that you do. And Amy, your research is incredible. So I do hope we can bring you back to continue this very important conversation.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And to all of you watching us live today on our YouTube channel, Twitter, or Facebook, thank you so much for joining us here today. The video of today's session and all our videos from our live series are available on our website, which is right here, the Canadian Preemies.org. And I thank our sponsor, AstraZeneca, for their ongoing support of our education sessions. And we are a charitable organization, and we believe that through support and education, we can empower families, ensure they are ready to care for their babies. Please visit our website, consider making a donation. Together, we can create a brighter future for all our families. And we'll see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay well.